beginning of every trip, our youth receive a mission trip booklet that's about this size, and our youth sponsors receive a mission trip booklet that's about this size. And those booklets lead us, guide us in our trip for the week. A typical day for us looks like an early morning breakfast, kind of continental breakfast style, a morning devotion done in our small groups, and then we're off to work sites sometime around 9 o'clock in the morning. We have lunch, and this year the lunch was provided for us by a local guy named Moses and his wife, and they are building their own catering business. And so we actually hired him for the week to prepare our food for us. I think he would have done it anyway, but as a way of supporting his business, we paid him to make our lunches for us every day. And some of our youth helped Moses in the kitchen and learned a little bit about how he makes the food that he makes. And then we go back to our work sites after lunch. We're there typically until about 3:30. Head back to our retreat center at about 4, have dinner around 5:30. We do worship together as a group after dinner. Then we have a couple hours to just be, which is where some of our best group bonding happens. So on the work site it happens, but at that 2 hours when you're exhausted but just kind of ready to let loose and have some fun, that's what happens, and then we head to bed. So that's what a typical day looks like. It is packed full of good conversation, of hard work, of good fun. But it is the stuff that makes this trip, I think, significant for what happens with our young people. The small groups and the work groups are the groups that they spend most of their time in. So in the small groups, they have their morning devotions. These are the groups that plan our worship. So I don't plan every worship night. I give them the skeleton of what worship ought to look like. They write all of our prayers. They choose all of our music. They decide how they want to present the scripture for that night. And then I provide a reflection piece that happens sometime in the middle of that worship service. And they cook our meals for us. So in this small group, they have a night where they are responsible for preparing our dinner or for cleaning up our dinner. So they rotate who prepares and who cleans up. And then we have a theme that guides our week. So this year, our theme was Micah 6:8, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. And so for this year, the idea was to challenge the way that we thought about what it looks like to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly in a way that we embody this in an everyday way. So not in some theoretical way, but what does it mean to do justice for those with whom you are in community? And so we attached that theme with the time of knots. So we did a big community knot one night, just to illustrate that we are all connected, and so doing justice means realizing that what we do affects other people one way or the other. We are all tied together in community. We tied knots that were about support. We tied knots that meant walking alongside of. And so being in community with the people of Laredo for a week meant living alongside of one another and being changed by each other. And so I think that is what you are going to hear tonight.
The top 10 reasons why the pastor went on a mission trip to Laredo, Texas. Number 1, my colleague needs help in order to produce a superb mission trip. We have incredible mission trips here, but they come with a lot of planning. All our best mission trips are not canned. They're created. You know, Lynn talked about these things in the passive voice, but she created the booklet for all of this. She created the t-shirts. She created everything that we did. So she does this enormous amount of work, and she needs adults to drive and to help with breakfast. And we were a multi-site work team, so we were in 6, 7 different sites over the week. So she needed help, psychologically and physically. But it's not unique what we do here, but she does an incredibly creative trip where she kind of blends it all together. And we should be very, very proud that we have in Lynn and in the kind of trips that she does for us. We're just really nice. Second reason, it's a great use of time as a pastor. And I don't have to be in charge. Listen, I don't understand why everyone who's a pastor doesn't go on a mission trip or a passport trip. I'll go on these trips like to Passport kids or a mission trip. There's hardly another pastor that goes on this. But it's a great use of time. For a week, I get to spend time with your kids. And I get to see them in a whole different context, and I get to know them better. And to that, reason number 3, I get to know better and more deeply the youth and to see them differently. I saw Adam Sasser lead games, and it went incredibly well. I saw Hannah Brown build benches. I saw Zach Luck cook delicious meals. We had fantastic time, and these kids were really pushed. I was listening to the Fireman book on CD by Joe Hill, so a lot of the middle school and early high school kids got in my, so I apologize if they're telling you any stories about that, but it was a great time while we were all riding together and listening to the book and discussing it. Fourthly, I went to see firsthand the good that these young people did in Jesus' name, and to see them grow, change, and mature. Now, I'm sure that we did a lot of good when we were there, but for me, the real good comes in the way that these young people's lives have changed, and the way that they now have relationship with fellow Christians who don't speak English at home. They now know what it's like to live on the border between America and Mexico. They know a fellow church people their age down there who are worshiping the same God. They have relationships with them. They still get texts and Facebook posts and Instagram and Snap stories from these folks. This is what we've been changed by the books that we've read, by the places we've gone, and by the people we've met. And this really is a part of that. Fifthly, I went too because I have a different relationship with Hannah than I did with my boys. So my boys needed a lot more space, and so I wasn't always able to go on some of the trips but Hannah's different. She's able to kind of live her own life. She doesn't need as much space as the boys did, or so I've thought. I went to Texas because I love Texas and I love Hispanic culture. I grew up in San Diego, and I really miss all the influences that Hispanic culture brought to Southern California and to Texas. It is so incredibly rich there. And Texas, like Florida and Ohio, is really kind of its own thing. If you haven't been, you really need to go. Seventh, mission trips are the best places for young people to fully understand what it means to follow Jesus. In this 1 week, it is all there together. You're working together, there's worship, there's fellowship, there's community, there's disagreements, there's folly, there's mistakes, but you're there together. It's the Christian life, I think, probably how the New Testament intended for us to live it. And it's a great week. 8, I went for holy moments, to be stretched and challenged. I think everyone who went on the trip was changed. I taught ESL to some women, taught them what polite phrases, how to ask things politely in English. It was really interesting. We had an almost midnight soccer game that was a holy moment. A worship service with a church, a worship service with just our group. It's VBS with some delightful kids, and standing on the Rio Grande with our kids. I had some unholy moments too. I mean, the funk of a room crammed with high school boys and hunger going to eat, of this we shall not speak. But mission trips are rife for those kinds of things. 9th, the meta task of a pastor, exactly like a parent, is to make him or herself obsolete. When all of the staff goes, you can see this most clearly. I know David was still here holding down the fort, but ministry is changing. We have deacon ministry teams, we have lay liturgists, we have different people serving communion. When I go away, you can see this most clearly about what we mean as Baptists, that we are all ministers to one another. We are all lay ministers. We're all lay leaders. A church needs leadership, but ministry in the 21st century may not look as it looks now. And so when we all go, you can see that, hey, we don't really need that guy around here. That becomes completely clear, and that is a good thing. Lastly, I went because these mission trips are really fun. They're difficult. You don't always get to eat what you want to eat. You certainly don't always get to sleep where you want to sleep, but they are an enormous amount of fun and they create memories. I thank you for the opportunity of going. I thank you for the opportunity of funding this, because you cannot do this just alone on parents' money. This is really well spent money, and I commend you for it.
So I was on the VBS site with a handful of these people. I think what was just so meaningful and moving to me is I thought that I was going to be doing more, and I didn't have to do anything. I really was able to step back, and Andrew was one of the teachers for a Bible study every single day, and Addie was translating, and Ellie and Ava had kids on their hips or on their backs, and Hannah was leading games, and they just did it all by themselves without prompting and me having to. I mean, I literally was just able to step back and watch our youth just lead in such beautiful, amazing ministry, and not just being able to do it, but being earnest and desiring to do it, excited about it. And on the last day, Hannah mentioned the woman whose house where we worked, who was very poor, had very, very little, and yet opened up her house to all these children. And as Hannah mentioned, kids in the neighborhood would just end up at her house. Families would drop them off for days. And what was so meaningful to me, one of those moments of God kind of inbreaking among us, was on the last day seeing all of our youth surround this woman and bless her. I think about Jesus going around and blessing people, and the Hebrew prophets pouring blessings over people. And that's what our youth did with this woman. And they just went down one by one and prayed over her and over her house and over the relationships in her life and who she is in the world. And it was so powerful to just see our youth bless this community, and to see this community in turn bless us in all the ways that they ministered and poured into us. So it's just really, it's very powerful. A lot of ways.
These trips have affected me very much, and I spend much of the year and the next years reflecting on them. One thing I've learned is that when you're not focused on yourself and getting pleasure, joy creeps up and surprises you unexpectedly. This year we arrived and pulled up to a house that kind of looked like a meth lab in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, this looks fun, yeah. I wasn't sure what to expect from this trip. I knew it would be blazing hot and work wouldn't be easy, but we'd been prepped not to think about the trip in terms of personal pleasure, and that made a difference. So our first day at VBS, I felt a little anxious. I wasn't sure how I was going to communicate with the kids, because a lot of them didn't know English at all, so I was kind of like, and I was in charge of games, so I was like, well, this will be interesting. As soon as we got there, Keith and I were shocked. We kind of joked about how, like, if you could close your eyes and imagine a place that you wouldn't want your kids to go to, that was kind of a place that had, like, dog poop in the back, along with glass and broken nails and stuff. But we laid down a tarp, and none of that mattered eventually. Like I said, joy crept in, and eventually it was just you and the kids, and seeing how hungry they were for just a little bit of your attention was crazy. It didn't take any words to be filled with God's Spirit. Who knew a little kid pulling at your hair would be a holy moment? The first day was hot, crowded, and a little chaotic, but the next days were truly touching and spiritually moving. You bonded with kids and watched them learn about God. These trips were supposed to be about helping other people, or so I thought, but eventually they ended up helping me. Every evening on the mission trip, Lynn challenges us and asks, where have you seen God today? And this is always a key thing for me, and I always think about it throughout the week. I saw God several times at my mission site, but honestly I think I saw God the most outside of my formal duties, just watching us youth interact and caring for each other. We are a family, and sometimes just being surrounded by the people who care and love you while worshiping God is enough to bring tears to my eyes.
I'm not usually an emotional person, sort of like my dad, but but in that environment, everyone is just really raw and vulnerable, and I found myself crying because of the happiness I felt during several worship services. Talking about God isn't really a common or even considered cool thing, during our time and day, but seeing a variety of different people in different stages of development feel comfortable enough to speak about God and their relationship with God was amazing, and you don't get something like this anywhere else. Like I said earlier, I constantly think about these trips. I think about the late night talks I had on the roof with Maggie, playing soccer with the Laredo youth group, blasting Miley Cyrus with Adam in the car, and bonding with the freshman girls, and just walking around from the group, talking to God for a few hours by myself under the Laredo sky were all very holy moments for me. Another thing I've learned about these trips is you are encouraged to step outside of your comfort zone. This is something that is hard for me, but I've learned to address a variety of major challenges in different spheres. I don't know if you've ever been to Texas, but it sort of feels like a different world. You're forced to immerse yourself into a different culture, but I learned that our connections as Christians span geography. This stretched me and helped me realize just how other cultures are. Each have their own unique blessings and challenges different from my own. The challenges of Laredo blew me away. The poverty was in your face from the minute you got there. Mangy dogs roamed freely, and the children seemed poorly dressed and often quite hungry. But the strength and blessings of the culture slowly emerged for me. For example, the Hispanic people struck me as so vibrant and emotional, free, and expressive. In one worship service, during one song, I literally just stopped singing, closed my eyes, and glanced back at the woman singing behind me. And she was just totally enjoying herself. She had her arms up in the air, and she was just singing really loudly, and it was a really beautiful moment. She was really into it, and that was really holy. I lost it. The land of Texas itself has its own look and beauty. The last night we celebrated the completion of the pizza oven on one of the sites with a big communal party with the Laredo Church. That evening I remember just walking around soaking in the beautiful setting sun and the vast horizon with new friends. The people themselves sometimes showed this remarkable inner strength that showed itself in their hardships. For instance, this one Mexican woman who had been volunteering her humble home all week for VBS. She hosted the kids each day. In the last hour of the last day, she asked for prayer, and my group circled her. She shocked me when through a translator, she explained, "Look, I need prayer because sometimes parents drop their kids off here and don't pick them up for days, leaving me with a long-term child care and mouths to feed. But I just pray for patience and love and not to think about the costs for me." And she went on to apologize. She had nothing to give us, the youth who had helped her, but she asked for the grace to get through what she was doing. I stood dumbfounded at her generous spirit and lack of resentment. I came in thinking we were the haves of a have-not world, but I was challenged by their amazingly Christian attitude, so much better than my own. These little anecdotes just give you a little taste of what an impact these moments that you get through a mission trip have on you and your faith. They certainly have impacted mine, and I'm thankful for this church for making them happen. Also, shout out to Lynn on her birthday because of her awesome planning and leadership for making these things happen and also making them really meaningful. You've caused my faith to grow and stretch in many ways, and we love you.
Favorite parts of the youth trips we go on with College Park is the connections that are formed. But this year was different than any other trip I've been on. This year, the overall goal wasn't just a building mission, but a mission to build relationships. Not only did I become closer with others in our youth group, I became close with the people we met in Laredo. Throughout the week, our youth group had the opportunity to bond with the Laredo congregation and their youth. We joined together for 2 church services, ate lunch together, and had a pizza party. I, along with some of the College Park and Laredo youth, got the chance to work with some of their young children for Vacation Bible School. During this time, we had a Bible lesson, played games, sang, and did crafts. I became very close with a young girl named Aide and a little boy named Eddie. Every day I was excited to see all the kids and hang out for even just a couple of hours. The hardest thing to do was say goodbye to them on the last day of VBS. What I hadn't realized until that moment was that not only had I hopefully changed their lives, but they had changed mine. I will always remember seeing them laugh and giggle at the simplest of things and hoping that somehow I made as much of an impact on their lives as they had made on mine. Although this trip to Laredo was one of the further ones we have taken, the distance didn't matter. We could have gone all the way to the other side of the world and it wouldn't have been as beneficial as this one. During this trip, we became fully immersed into a culture very different from ours and created bonds with this community that will never be broken. We may never see any of these people again, but I will always remember this precious week we spent together serving their community together.